Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Keipert Labs. In today's video we're going to be discussing the different types of forces. So firstly we're going to introduce or define what we mean by a force, and then we're going to look at the two main categories of forces we call contact forces and non-contact forces, with some examples of each. So what is a force? A push or a pull or a twist, essentially. And if we want to define it a little bit more generally than that, we'd say that a force is something that causes an object to change its motion in some way, to move, from side to side, to slow down, to speed up, to change direction. Anything that might achieve that is a force. And so the thing is that forces can sometimes be easy to see, and sometimes the effect of the force can be hard to see, or it may not look like much is happening. And so that can be the challenge in our understanding of physics and helping us to kind of see the way that something is working. So we mentioned that forces can be a contact or non-contact force. So let's start by looking at what we mean by contact forces. As the name would suggest, it's a force that occurs when two objects are touching because of the contact of two things. Okay, now, that might be a simple kind of, like we were seeing in the previous image, pushing on a box. It might be a friction force, so because of the contact between an object and the surface over which it's sliding. It might be tension, like the stretching in a rope or something as we pull an object along the surface, or something that hangs, kind of, like an elevator hanging from a cable. We also have what we call the normal force, which is, and it's not normal in the way that it's defining it being typical, but normal as in a mathematical word for being perpendicular to something, so at right angles to something. So a force that exists at right angles to an object on a surface. So is the normal force. So you can see in this image here, the normal force is the pushing of the table up against the box sitting on top of it. It's perpendicular to the surface of the table. Okay, if the table's at an angle, then it's still perpendicular and at right angles to that. And then we've also got a spring force. So maybe the compression of a spring or the stretching of a spring is a contact force. It's making contact with the spring. In some way. And then also one that's perhaps a little harder to see as being two objects touching, the one that is still very important, is air resistance, or drag as a bit more of a general kind of name. This idea of the air pushing against something, slowing it down or resisting its motion. So pushing against the parachute to slow the fall or the descent. Okay, so all of these, and there's plenty of other examples we could come up with, or other specific different versions or variations on each one, but they're just some examples of forces that happen because the objects themselves are touching in some physical way. So what about what happens when the objects are not touching? Well, that's what we call a non-contact force. So a force that can be applied or can have an effect without any contact between the two objects. So they don't have to be physically touching for there to be some sort of change involved. So there's three main ones that we focus on. Magnetism is the first one, the effect of this attraction or repulsion that exists between a magnet and metal objects, or between one magnet and another magnet. And especially that the stronger the magnet is, the more obvious that this force where it happens from a distance. Next, we've also got gravity. This idea of this attraction force, that if I pick up a pen and then I let it go, then that pen falls towards the center of the Earth, because of this attractive force of gravity. And the distance between the things has an effect on the strength of the gravitational force, but it is a force that acts from a distance. And then we also talked about the electrostatic force, or what we, in everyday terms, talk about as static electricity. So if we, rubbing a balloon on your hair, and then you're seeing that we're able to actually pick up pieces of paper off a surface. Or another one that you may be less familiar with directly, it's what's called a Van de Graaff generator. We're going to have another look at these in the future, but where it can build up a static charge and you can see the effect on his hair, as funny as it looks from the photo. So all three of these forces are examples of forces that happen without the objects having to touch. So we define a force, a push, a pull, or a twist, or anything that is causing an object to change its motion in some way. We said that forces can be contact forces, where there's the effect that happens because the objects are touching, like tension or friction. And then we've also got forces that the effect happens without them having to be touching, so magnetism, gravity, or electrostatic force. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.